argument that you can't fight terrorism without a new International Court of Criminal Justice. That's the end game.
They've just arrested over 500. 500 are being people, we don't know who they are being held incognito, without a trial, without bond.
When you compare it to the comparable legislation in Germany, this one's worse. On the face of the record, the protective custody order that was the operative document for most of the early 1934 to approximately 1938 contained better guarantees of civil liberties than this bill that President Clinton has offered to the American people.
The Homeland Security Post is the creation of a national American Gestapo. The last head of the Gestapo was a guy named Mueller. Mueller is now head of the FBI. Mueller was the cover-up man for George Bush Sr. He's part of the trilateralist team. In fact, on Bush's transition team, Baby Bush had 9 out of 10 of his advisors from the Council on Foreign Relations. The sole exception, Richard Armitage, who's head of drug operations out of Southeast Asia for the Central Intelligence Agency. Richard Armitage has had heavy connections to both Bush administrations.
Get ready to go with me on a riveting ride down the heroin highway from Burma to Bush.
The film Air America reveals how George Bush's CIA dealt in heroin during the Vietnam War.
President Reagan has appointed Vice President Bush as the #1 policeman for controlling narcotic in the United States.
Colonel James Rambo Grice was the most highly decorated Green Beret hero in the Vietnam War. Bo's search for POWs and MIAs took him into the heart of the Golden Triangle.
So I asked the White House, what about the offer from General Kunza to cooperate with the United States in reducing the narcotic and controlling the amount coming through this area?
You're about to hear from Colonel James Bo Grice that the Bush boys had no interest in solving the drug problem. None whatsoever.
The aide was very slow to answer. He said to me, Colonel Bo, there is no interest here in that matter. I know that the American CIA used opium and heroin to finance many of the operations in Laos and in Cambodia. They financed the war using opium and heroin.
And after the Vietnam War, Richard Armitage was a prominent narcotic personnel, prominent trafficker in Bangkok.
In Bangkok?
Yeah, after Vietnam War. And this finance was being controlled, the finance support was controlled or given by Richard Armitage, who settled or who stayed in Vietnam.
Richard Armitage was George Bush's key man, trafficking in heroin out of Southeast Asia between 75 and 79. The National Guard would work with FEMA to become a national police. A Gestapo.
It's a war for control. The control of your mind and your body. Americans are traditionally independent, very hard to control. But the architects of the New World Order have ways to force you into submission. First, through a well-orchestrated agenda including health care, financial security, safety from crime, and environmental issues, the public will be coerced into accepting a national identification card. It will be disguised in the cloak of benevolence, great good deed for the people. Once the national identification card is in place, without it, you'll not be able to make deposits or withdraw, write a check at the supermarket, or even drive your automobile. Legislation will require all citizens to carry their national ID card at all times.
I think once you have a system where the government has to establish your identity by issuing an ID card, we have lost the initiative as a people.
In my humble opinion, I think we need to start looking at the Bush family and this entire monstrosity of
bombings.
There's been an explosion deep below the 110-story towers of the center in New York City.
That he's responsible for the crash of the airliners into the World Trade Center.
The number one suspect, this man, Osama bin Laden.
Evidence? I mean, come on. Let's get real. No evidence. There's a conviction. And he's willing to send our troops into Afghanistan to mass murder, maim, and mutilate those people. Do they hate the United States? I would think that they should. Because the United States was financing the Russians at the same time the Afghans were laying down their lives for their freedom. Oh, we were financing both sides. The Mujahideen was financed by you, the American taxpayer. We were furnishing them in the war against the Soviets. We financed both sides. You say, well, why is that? Because we want to control the outcome. They lifted the ban that was imposed by Jimmy Carter on the Soviet Union because they were slaughtering all of these Afghanis. But when President Reagan, old Red Ronnie, Mr. 666 himself, who was so far left he made Fidel Castro look like a member of the Birch Society, Osama bin Laden. Can you believe that? Do you think that Bush and the boys were in bed with Osama bin Laden? I mean, business-wise. Do you think that Senior Bush was in bed with Saddam Hussein in the oil business? Oh, you might start thinking about that.
Bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, George Bush Sr. were all in business together. We're talking about business partners in oil companies. You know what we're talking about here? We're talking about high treason, crimes against the state, high treason against America, high treason. We're talking about the George Bush, Bin Laden, Saddam Hussein. These men are all in business. There's going to come a day in this country very soon when we're going to find out that all these people used to tell us, and they used to tell me all the time, oh, it could America. Yes, it happened in Germany, and unfortunately, yeah, there were a lot of Jews that were killed in the Holocaust, but it'll never happen in America. It's already happened. They just haven't told you yet.
We know one thing, that the Afghan war resulted in a continuation of the dope trafficking, heroin, out of Afghanistan. For certain, the Central Intelligence Agency, which was once headed by George Bush Sr., in heroin to finance their operations. They were trafficking in heroin out of Southeast Asia when General Khun Sa in Shanland, which is in the heart of the Golden Triangle, was dealing with the Central Intelligence Agency. Khun Sa was asked who was the number one trafficker of heroin into the Western world. Who's the number one man? And they said Richard Armitage, CIA operative. Oh, Armitage. He was made Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan, personally appointed. Of course, George Bush was really in operation then. He wasn't simply vice president. He was acting as president. The CIA has always been the enforcement arm of the Council on Foreign Relations. Practically every head of the CIA has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So what's it all about? Trafficking in dope, killing, mass murder, corruption, overthrowing free countries to impose dictatorship. That's been the course. Communist China is getting the benefit of our loss. They gain, we lose. They get stronger, we get weaker. Reagan and Bush Sr., transferred about $17 billion in nuclear and conventional hardware, military hardware, to the Communist Chinese, who have executed more people than any nation on the planet Earth. The Communist Chinese about Hitlered Hitler at the height of his hysteria. They've mass murdered in excess of 100 million people. They have some 23 million people.